Hi, friends. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to talk today about some Old Testament or Tanakh, if you're Jewish, prophecies and different things from the Old Testament and how that kind of relates to Jesus, or at least how Christians see that it relates to Jesus. So, the first thing that I wanted to say was that both Jewish and Christians across the board believe that Jesus did die. Like it's considered a fact in both cultures or both, religions. Um, it was documented by Josephus Flavius and by Cornelius Tacitus and others who just documented what happened during that time period. So, anyways, Jesus did die, and he died on a specific day, okay? And that day has importance because Jesus actually died on Passover. And for those of you, if you're watching and you are Jewish, you know that Passover is an extremely important day. So, for those of you that aren't Jewish, and maybe you're Christian or have forgotten this story, or maybe you've never been told this story, I'll tell it to you. So, God had his people, which were in Egypt, and there were the plagues. If you remember, I don't know if you know how much you know about what those plagues were, but the water turned into blood, and all these different things happen as God was trying to free his people from the Egyptians. Okay, and he was using Moses during this time period, and so the 10th and final plague was the Passover. And what God instructed his people to do was to take a lamb into their house. In fact, they were supposed to live with this lamb for a couple days, maybe even a week. I don't remember the exact amount of time they were supposed to live with the lamb, but it was a couple days to a week. And then they had to slaughter this lamb, and they had to put the blood over their front door, okay, across the top, the lintel, or across the top of the door, okay. And what happened was, the night of the Passover, the angel of death came through the city and took all of the firstborn sons of every household, unless they had that blood on the doorpost. Okay, they had that doorpost, they were passed over and saved and protected from that. Okay, and this was the 10th plague. This was the one that got Pharaoh's attention and helped to free the people. Okay, and so there is a reason why that was still celebrated and is still celebrated today in the Jewish faith. Okay, and it's extremely important. And Jesus actually died on the day of Passover. So let me explain why Christians believe that that's important. And that's because we see Jesus as that lamb. We call him the Lamb of God. In fact, there's several songs about him being called the Lamb of God. And there's even in the Tanakh or the Old Testament, either one, there are scriptures that talk about there being a Lamb of God, a Lamb of God. And Christians believe that person was Jesus. So anyways, now something important to understand about Jewish culture and how they celebrate different days like Passover or even Sabbath or things like that is it starts at night when the sun goes down until the following day when the sun goes down. That's how they would see a day, okay? And so the day before Jesus died, or the night before Jesus died, I guess, the sun went down. He celebrated the Passover meal with his disciples. And then they go into the garden, and he's taken by the guards, and that's a whole long story. But basically, he comes before the chief priests, elders, and and is tried before the governor. And he is actually put to death and crucified, and his death is finished and completed all on that day of Passover before the sun sets. So it's all on that same, what would be a Jewish day, okay? And the reason for that is that there's extreme significance that I believe God wanted us to all see through that. And that Jesus was the Lamb of God. So, interesting, just a couple of, Old Testament references to this. Hebrews 9:22 says, without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins. So very interesting point that there needs to be a shedding of blood to forgive sins. And Christians see that shedding of blood as being through Jesus, that he shed his blood like as the Lamb of God. And so we will be saved because that angel of death will pass over us, essentially, because we'll have his blood on our doorposts, so to speak, or on our souls. And, so a couple other things that are just interesting to think about is where Jesus was tried. Jesus was tried actually on the temple site, okay? And he was tried ultimately by the governor, but he was brought by chief priests and elders and rulers at that time. And they made claims against him. And even the governor was like, I think he's innocent. Like, I'm washing my hands of this. I don't think that this is, I'm just not sure that he's really guilty. But the crowd kind of went crazy and demanded that he be crucified. So very interesting if you look at the place where Jesus was, where he was sentenced basically, which was on that temple site. And if you go back thousands of years before then, there was Abraham, and Abraham is seen as the father of the Jewish people. He's also seen as the father of the Muslim people as well. That's a topic for another day. But anyways, Abraham was God asked him to sacrifice his son, Isaac, on Mount Moriah specifically. Okay, so they go up to Mount Moriah, and the whole point of this, I know it sounds a little crazy to go sacrifice your son, that God tells you to do this, and it sounds a little kooky, but the whole point of it was that God really wanted to see Abraham's heart for him and know that he was really willing to do anything. So as Abraham is about to kill his son, God tells him to stop. No, let's stop this. And there's a ram over on the side of where they were on Mount Moriah. And God said, use this ram. I've provided this ram as an intercessor. So very fascinating, because Mount Moriah is the place where Solomon's temple was built, the second temple was built, and where the current Dome of the Rock Mosque is located. But it's also, for that second temple time period, which is when Jesus was around, before it was destroyed in 70 AD, that is the place where he was committed to die. Now, they took him outside of the city gates, and he was crucified in Golgotha. And but just fascinating that, if you see that correlation between Abraham and God providing a sacrifice to cover and to save Isaac, and then again, that happens on that same site for all of us that are willing to accept Jesus. So another fascinating thing, just, throwing this out there, that in fact, most of the prophets that are in the Tanakh or in the Old Testament were martyred. And so like Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah in the Old Testament, in the Tanakh, was martyred for his faith. Ezekiel, same thing, martyred for his faith. And it wasn't until later that a lot of these rabbis that were putting these um, prophets to death were realized, like, oh yeah, they're legit. Like, they were really from God, and we put them to death. So, in fact, Isaiah, who is a huge prophet in the Old Testament, in the Tanakh, was actually sewn in half. So, yeah, there were several times when the rabbis, the chief priests, and the key elders of the church, of the Jewish faith, made some mistakes in identifying who was really from God and who wasn't. So with that, I just ask you a question. I just ask, could it be that the chief priests, the elders, the rabbis at that time, the time of Jesus, missed something? Because right now we have what's called rabbinic Judaism, which is where we do have, the Torah, and inside of the Tanakh is the Torah, and the Tanakh is like what Christians see as the Old Testament. So we still have that, but then there's a lot of other things like the Talmud and things that are teachings of rabbis and different things through the years. Anyways, long story short, it's very interesting to just think about. There's like they killed so many of the prophets. Could it not be that they also missed the Messiah, the coming Messiah? And so just something to think about. If you're interested in even just investigating that at all, read Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 was written hundreds of years before Jesus was ever born, and it predicts his death exactly. Also read Psalm 22, exactly predicts Jesus' death hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus was born. And the Old Testament, it's crazy. It also predicts that the Messiah will come from Bethlehem, and he does. Jesus is born in Bethlehem, that he will come from the line of David, and he does. He comes from the line of David. And if you ever read the Bible and you're like, I don't get all this stuff about, so-and-so begot so-and-so and so-and-so, and it's like these big lines of lists of people, and you don't have no clue who these people are, right? And the whole point of that, through Numbers, and then even like stuff in the New Testament, where it's like talking about all these family lines, and you're like, what is this all about? It's trying to show that Jesus came from David. That's what the whole point of all of that record keeping was for. Or at least that's what I believe as a Christian. So anyways, yeah, isn't it fascinating? I just think that's so interesting, all of these things. So if you are Jewish and if you are curious, just to find out about Isaiah 53, it is known, it's interesting because it is a part of the Tanakh still, but it is called the forbidden passage. Anyways, read it, because if nothing else, that's fascinating when something is in your biblical text and you're forbidden to read it. What does that mean? So read it. And then Psalm 22, read Psalm 22 also. And if you have questions, I would love to chat with you. And if you have questions for me, I would love to help you with that. And I may also just have questions for you about your faith as well, and different beliefs that you have, if you're open to that. So anyways, thank you so much for watching, and click below, subscribe, and like the video. Thank you so much. Bye, guys.